Welcome to the Galileo monthly update. I'm joined today by Yolande. Welcome, Yolande.
Thank you, Warren. It's nice to be here on a very cold day in Johannesburg.
So winter's definitely hit the country with a vengeance. I see, the Cape getting a lot of rain and Joburg getting into its usual cold spell. So let's hope weather patterns have normalized, which will be good for the farmers and I guess our whole industry. I thought it would be good for us just to talk today a little bit about the vaccination program, that's going on in South Africa, and any thoughts around how that impacts on our investment markets. What are your thoughts on this, Yolande?
Yes, well, I think, if you look at the offshore markets and what's happening there, or countries, where there are vaccination programs where they're aggressively vaccinating their population, the numbers are definitely coming down significantly. A place like the UK currently looks like they might have this pandemic under control. And of course, we need to take these numbers with caution because the pandemic has given us a lot of nasty surprises, I would say, over the last few months. But the numbers, when we look at it, does look encouraging. So if that's the case in South Africa, if we can get our program to speed up a bit, we will see the economy starting to open up. What that means is that all industries would be impacted quite positively. Think about the tourism industry, for example. So, the pandemic has caused a lot of job losses, where people could still manage to actually keep their B&Bs open, that kind of thing. If the borders open and we get international tourists arriving, it is so good for our lodges and so many other places that rely on international travelers. So that would be massively positive. The other thing, just incidentally, one of our clients told me about a big engineering project that they're busy with, and they had 800 COVID cases on that project. So can you imagine the big impact of that on a project, the time delays, the extra costs that's involved in that? If those people that's working in that are all vaccinated, it takes huge risks off the table. It just gives that opportunity to think about what could happen, to know with more certainty what the outcome would be of projects, what the benefits would be, that kind of thing. And what we know is that confidence does drive markets. So I think these vaccination programs are definitely taking away a lot of fear that people are feeling. And it also takes huge risks to the table. So it should really have a positive impact. What are your thoughts and how do you see this panning out in the offshore markets?
I think you're right in terms of the countries that have been at the forefront of vaccinating their populations have certainly seen a big uptick in economic activity as well. And I think if you look at investment markets, one of the things that markets are always looking for is the future direction and future trends. And I think that's a big issue here is as global investors start to see the end of the big kind of waves of the pandemic. I think the comment is we won't see the end of COVID very quickly, but hopefully we see the end of this massive sort of infection spikes around especially Western Europe and the US. And as that happens, so investors gain more confidence that companies can continue to operate fairly normally, that the big cost of actually managing their production lines and those kinds of things, as you've alluded to, those costs go away, and potentially that profits can normalize in the companies and the sectors that have been majorly impacted by COVID. So I think that element of certainty that investors are looking for is really important. And as they see, 60-70% of these countries' populations getting vaccinated, and especially the elderly and the at-risk people, so I think investors would gain more and more confidence. And if you ally that with what's going on around the fiscal stimulus from central banks around the world, it does actually create a very nice set of conditions for global economies to start recovering very nicely, and potentially for that to translate further into more stock market gains. But I think that the catch in all of this, as you said, from a South African point of view as well, will be the countries that are lagging in their vaccination rollouts. Because I think, at the moment, especially the Western countries it's not fair to say Western, all countries are focusing on their own vaccination programs and ordering multiple times more vaccines than they need. And the problem with that is that this this pandemic needs to be dealt with globally, because as we see, it can mutate in various countries. And so, if a place like India doesn't vaccinate its population, that will become the hotbed for further variations of the vaccine. And the more mutations you get, the less effective the current vaccines will be. So I think that the massive vaccination rollout in the States, the way that it's accelerated, is really good for markets just in general. But I would caution that we need to see the global vaccination drive accelerating a lot before we can all kind of breathe a sigh of relief. And certainly, just selfishly, sitting here in our houses, worrying about lockdowns from time to time, and isolating ourselves because our friend's friend had COVID and there was a contact. All of those issues are really not good for our psyche as investors, and not good for the economy as a whole. That element of anxiety is pervasive, and it doesn't help investors in the long term.
Yeah, I think just that confidence in not having a lockdown would have a major impact on our economy.
So if if we're holding thumbs, we see the vaccination drive in South Africa accelerating. We see the private sector getting more involved. Then hopefully, we get some more and more increasingly positive news in South Africa. I mean, at the time of this recording, we're over 700,000 South Africans vaccinated. Fortunately, those are a lot of the healthcare workers and some of the elderly in our country, and we need to see that that accelerating so that hospitalizations go down. So if we're talking about vaccinations and what's going on in South Africa, I guess another big issue for us that is a constant hot topic for all South Africans is what's happening with the fight around corruption in South Africa at the moment. From your perspective, what are you seeing?
Yeah, we've had lots of questions about that. I think it was so good to see Eskom actually being suspended. And the fact that the ANC is not, turning around and saying that it's okay or making it all right is a huge thing. There was actually a strong reprimand from the National Working Committee saying that this kind of behavior is condemned. So something that the ANC has never done against their own members, and especially someone as highly ranked as Makashile. We are seeing more and more people going to court, which is nice. The Zondo Commission seems to be dragging along, but the NPA, I think there was also a statement saying that they can't prosecute until the Zondo Commission has finished because people are still testifying. So we will have to wait for that to get to its end and the report to come through before we'll see any sort of prosecutions from them. But it's moving in the right direction. And I think the feeling is that Cyril Ramaphosa is in a stronger position, which is good for our political environment and then for our economy. It just gives investors, again, that kind of certainty that things are moving right, that corruption is not such a thing when they have to invest here, and then spills over to markets again. It should be very positive.
So the other interesting thing for me is we recently saw a publication around of Eskom's debt position, and that was very interesting as well. That Eskom's debt was forecast to peak at about 500 to 550 billion rand. And in March 2020, it was sitting at a level of about 483 billion rand and climbing. And we recently got an update in Parliament from Pravin Gordhan about Eskom's debt, and it's sitting at a level of just over 400 billion rand at the moment. So the interesting thing about that is that the very strong exchange rate has helped with the dollar-denominated debt of Eskom. and secondly, that some of the cost controls implemented by new management and some of the efficiencies that they are wanting to drive through the organization have kicked in and allowed Eskom to repay a good portion of debt already. And then we've got the news, which is good for Eskom and bad for everybody else, which is the tariff increases that they're allowed to pass through onto consumers, which means that debt issue. It's certainly not going away. I mean, 400 billion rand is a huge number, but what it does mean is that the debt might have peaked already, and if it's peaked and turned, that will actually raise investor confidence further and potentially give scope to solutions around the Eskom debt problem that might not have been there before. So I must say, between these moves around corruption that you've mentioned, it's always 3 steps forward, 1 back with corruption, but we are moving forward. And the Eskom debt issue, I think we've got some quite positive news that we should acknowledge as investors. There are things that are happening that are good, and I'm saying that in a recording in a time when I have no water in my house for the last 24 hours and Eskom threatening load shedding. So it's always interesting in South Africa, but I do think things are moving forward.
And that is very encouraging. But you also mentioned the strong rand. So maybe just some more on that for our clients.
Yeah, I think it's, the CEO of our asset management business, Pragnesh, was sort of half joking, a little while ago saying, anyone going to take a bet that the rand will reach 12 Rand 50? And I don't think anyone in our business internally was willing to accept, those odds. And at the time of this publication, we're on about below 14 Rand to the dollar. And so just to understand the impact of a very strong rand is it's really good for things like our trade balances. In other words, how much we spend on buying imports versus how much money we make on exporting things. And the more money we make on exporting and the less we spend on importing means we've got a trade surplus. And a trade surplus is really good for the country in terms of paying down debt, building up foreign reserves, and further strengthening the rand. So I think that's a very good sign. And certainly, if the price of commodities continue to rise, that will be good for that trade surplus and good for the mining houses. And I think maybe just as a last point, we need to emphasize that, the strong rand shouldn't be a reason to delay getting your offshore allocation right. The fact that we've been saying for quite some time now, probably 2 years, our target level for the rand is 15 Rand 50 to the dollar. And so whenever the rand is stronger than that, our recommendation would be to use the strong rand as the opportunity to get your rands converted to dollars if you need to do it. So the fact that one person's taken a bet in our business around 12 Rand 50 is certainly not a prediction. We're not in the game of predicting currencies, and I would say that at these levels, anywhere around 14 or 14 to 15 are fantastic levels against the dollar, and investors should really be impatient to get their offshore balances right. They shouldn't be waiting now to hope that it gets to 12 or 11, because that might happen, but the probabilities are very low.
Like you say, all about asset allocation and making sure that your position, your personal portfolio is structured correctly.
I think that's the critical point here is, make sure you understand what your allocation should be. If you're correctly allocated overseas, well done. Then I'm sorry that the rand is strong because it's not helping the performance of your offshore investments when you calculate in rands. But having said that, this does represent a great opportunity for those who are underinvested overseas. And so, we would urge people to take advantage of that now. Who knows when the opportunity comes again.
Exactly.
So I think on that note, we're running out of time, and we just, from my perspective, I think it's going to be an interesting 2 or 3 months now as we see the vaccine rollout hopefully accelerating. I'm fairly confident it will. I don't think it'll be as fast as everyone would like. I know that for myself. I would love to have the jab and be able to live life a bit more normally. But I do think we should be conscious of what's going on around us. Some of the good news events that are happening are not getting much coverage. And certainly that's, I guess, our job is to provide that balanced perspective.
Sure. Thank you very much, Warren, for doing just that.
Thanks, Yolande, and thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be in touch in a month's time.